In order to solve linear equations, it is important to be familiar with 5 properties that will help with this process. The first property is the distributive property. If you have one or more terms inside of parentheses and a term directly in front or behind the parentheses, then you ought to multiply all the terms inside the parentheses by the outside term. In general, if you have a times a polynomial b plus c inside the parentheses, you can multiply the a to both the b and c inside. This will give you ab plus ac. Also, if you have a polynomial b plus c inside parentheses times a, you can multiply both the b and c to the a to give you ba plus ca. Keep in mind that this property also works in the same manner for subtraction. We also have the addition property of equality. Given the equation a equals b, you can add c to both sides of the equation to obtain a plus c equals b plus c, which is equivalent to the given equation. Essentially, this property states that the same number may be added to each side of an equation. The subtraction property of equality is similar to the one for addition. Given the equation a equals b, you can subtract c from both sides of the equation to obtain a minus c equals b minus c, which is equivalent to the given equation. Essentially, this property states that the same number may be subtracted from each side of an equation. The multiplication property of equality states that given a equals b, you can multiply c to both sides of the equation and obtain an equation that is equivalent to the given equation. This property indicates that you can multiply both sides of an equation by the same amount. The division property of equality states that given a equals b, you can divide c from both sides of the equation and obtain an equation that is equivalent to the given equation. This property indicates that you can divide both sides of an equation by the same amount. In addition to knowing the properties just described, it is important to follow 5 steps when solving linear equations. Step 1 is to clear fractions or decimals from your equation, if you have any. To eliminate fractions, multiply the entire equation by the least common denominator. To clear decimals, multiply by a power of 10. Step 2 requires that you simplify each side separately. To do this, use the distributive property to clear parentheses and combine like terms as needed. Step 3 says to isolate the variable terms on one side of the equation. To do this, use the addition or subtraction properties to get all terms with variables on one side of the equation and all numbers on the other side. Step 4 is to isolate the variable. Use the multiplication or division properties to get an equation with just a variable on one side. Step 5 is to check your answer by substituting your proposed solution into the original equation to see if you get a true statement. Now that we know the properties and the steps to solving linear equations, let's look at some examples. In example 1, we are given 5x plus 2 equals 17. We can skip steps 1 and 2 because we don't have fractions, decimals, or parentheses to eliminate. So we go to step 3, which is to isolate 5x, the term containing a variable. To do this, we can use the subtraction property to subtract 2 from both sides of the equation. This gives us the equation 5x equals 15. Step 4 is to isolate the variable x. We use the division property to divide both sides of the equation by 5. Therefore, the solution is 3. Don't forget step 5, which is to check your solution by substituting it back into the original equation to see if you get a true statement. In example 2, we have 4x minus 2x minus 5 equals 4 plus 6x plus 3. Again, we can skip step 1 because there are no fractions or decimals in the problem. Step 2 indicates to use the distributive property to remove parentheses and combine like terms. There are no parentheses in this problem, but notice that we can combine like terms on both sides of the equation. On the left side, we can combine 4x and 2x. On the right side, we can combine the 4 and 3. Doing this will give us the equation 2x minus 5 equals 7 plus 6x. Step 3 again is to isolate the variable. In this case, using the addition property, we add 5 to both sides of the equation. This will give us 2x equals 12 plus 6x. We are not done isolating the variable because we see the variable x on both sides of the equation. We want all terms containing x on one side of the equation. To do this, we can use the subtraction property to subtract 6x from both sides of the equation. This will give us negative 4x equals 12, where the variable is now on one side of the equation. The last step is to isolate the variable x by using the division property to divide both sides of the equation by negative 4. This will give us x equals negative 3. Again, step 5 is to check your solution. In example 3, we can skip step 1 again. Notice that we have parentheses this time, so as step 2 indicates, we will use the distributive property to remove them. To do this, we multiply both terms in the binomial x minus 5 by 2. Doing this will give us 2x minus 10 plus 3x on the left side of the equation. Usually, when we use the distributive property, you can combine like terms also. So we need to check for this. On the left side of the equation, there are two terms we can combine, 2x and 3x. After combining, we end up with the equation 5x minus 10 equals x plus 6. The next step is to isolate the terms containing the variable x. To do this, we start by adding 10 to both sides of the equation. This gives us 5x equals x plus 16. Notice we still have x on both sides of the equation. So we next subtract x from both sides. This will give us 4x equals 16. Next, we divide both sides by 4 to isolate the x. This gives us x equals 4. In example 4, notice that we have fractions. So we begin with step 1, which is to clear the fractions by multiplying by the least common denominator. The two denominators are 6 and 2, which means that the least common denominator is 6. So we multiply both sides of the equation by 6. On the left side of the equation, when we try to multiply the first fraction by 6, notice that the two 6's cancel and we can bring down the x plus 7. When we try to multiply the second fraction by 6, we can simplify because we know that 2 will divide into 6 3 times. Therefore, we actually end up with 3 times the binomial 2x minus 8. On the right side of the equation, we simply multiply to get negative 24. Notice that we still have parentheses in the equation, so our next step is to remove the parentheses by using the distributive property to multiply the 3 to both the 2x and the 8. Doing this will give us the equation x plus 7 plus 6x minus 24 equals negative 24. Remember, after using the distributive property, you need to check to see if you can combine like terms. In this case, we can combine x and 6x as well as the 7 and negative 24. Doing so will give us the equation 7x minus 17 equals negative 24. To isolate the terms containing x, we use the addition property to add 17 to both sides of the equation. This will give us 7x equals negative 7. To isolate the x, we will divide by 7 on both sides. This will give us the solution x equals negative 1. In our last example, we have an equation with decimals. Again, we will do step 1, which is to eliminate the decimals by multiplying by a power of 10. In this case, notice that each decimal has 2 digits behind the decimal point. The number of digits behind the decimals indicates the number of zeros in your multiple of 10. In our example, we will need to multiply both sides of the equation by 100. Basically, this will move the decimal point over 2 times in each decimal. This will give us the equation 6x plus 9 times the binomial 15 minus x equals 7 times 15. Notice we have parentheses which we can eliminate by using the distributive property to multiply the 9 times both the 15 and x. This will give us the equation 6x plus 135 minus 9x equals 105. Again, we check to see if we can combine like terms. In our example, we can combine the 6x and negative 9x to give us the equation negative 3x plus 135 equals 105. Next, we want to isolate the term containing the x. We use the subtraction property to subtract 135 from both sides of the equation. This will give us negative 3x equals negative 30. Next, we divide both sides of the equation by negative 3 to isolate the x. This will give us x equals 10. Again, don't forget to check your solution. You should look over the examples on the web page and then test your knowledge using Test Yourself.